Hello, my name's Rachel Geddes. I'm the autism practitioner for the Child Health and Disability team for the south of Highland, which covers Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey. And I'm also part of the neurodevelopmental training team based out of the Pines in Inverness. So today's session was advertised as "Is your child chaotic and confused?" This is part of lots of neurodevelopmental conditions where children have problems with something that we call the flexibility of thought. It's definitely part of the autism diagnosis, but we also see it in other neurodevelopmental conditions such as ADHD and dyspraxia. And it's trying to think about why is your child struggling with routine, with structure, with change, and with making choices. This often doesn't get talked about enough, but then professionals bandy around words such as executive function or theory of mind. And what do those things really mean? So the aim of today's session is to try and demystify that a little bit and to help you and give you some examples as to simple changes you might be able to make in your child's life to make them less chaotic and confused and therefore make life a little bit easier to live with. It's also thinking about when we know why a child can't do something, it makes it much easier for us to understand and to be able to help them and support them. So, what are the things that make up flexibility of thought? If you look at the diagram on the right, there is no two children that have got the same brain patterns. All of our children have different issues and different problems. But what we can see in neurodevelopmental conditions is that they have problems with what's known as theory of mind, what's known as central coherence, what's known as context blindness, and what's known as executive functioning. It's really important that we try to get to grips with these, but they are words that you sort of look at and you think, what on earth does that mean? So hopefully by the end of this video, you will have an idea of what they mean and be able to relate them to your child. As I'm talking, I would advise that you've got some paper and a pen and you jot down some notes within each of the things where you think, yes, that really applies to my child. Or, oh yeah, Molly can't do that, or Freddie can't do this, or, oh yeah, that's why that's happening. Parents have often told me when we talk about these sorts of subjects that it's almost like a light bulb going on, that they've seen their child has this problem and they've no idea why. And when you figure out the why, it makes it much easier to then be able to meet that child's needs in a way that they can understand. So, starting off with theory of mind, what does it really mean? So this is part of a parenting program that I wrote during the first lockdown. Okay, so I was thinking about having a group of parents in a room with me. So the examples, sort of, bear with me, it'll make sense. Just imagine you're in a room with lots of other parents, and we will have opportunity to do question and answer sessions after you've watched this film. So I'm a neurotypical adult and I can put myself into somebody else's shoes, not literally, but metaphorically. So I can imagine your thoughts and feelings, how it might have been getting your children ready for school this morning. If we've just gone back over the lockdown or you've got primary kids that are already back in. I can imagine what that's like. I've got teenagers, so I can think about what it's been like getting your teenagers back into some semblance of routine following a period of time where it's been really difficult and really unstructured. I can relate to how much planning has to go into your day, of how you then get to places on time. Say, for instance, you're a working mom, how you get the kids to school on time, how you get to work on time, and how you manage your day. I can feel that some of you will have a little bit of understanding about this subject, but I can also understand how for some of you this will be completely new and you'll have never have talked about this sort of subject before. So some of you, you'll be feeling quite comfortable. For others of you, you might be quite daunted by these words that I've just stuck on a slide and you're thinking, what on earth is that, Rachel? I can guess that at least one of you thinks that this is a waste of time. Yeah, so there might be a parent that's sat there thinking, oh God, so-and-so said I've got to do this, but I don't really know if I want to, and my head feels like it's going to explode. I believe that learning is really important, but I know that everybody else doesn't feel the same way. From my own personal perspective, I love to be surrounded by people. I love to be in a training room at the Pines with 20 parents and be able to chat and laugh and talk through examples. But I also understand that not everybody feels the same way as me. That's because I've got theory of mind and I can put myself into the positions, thoughts and feelings of other people that are different to me. Okay, so let's think about how your child might be struggling with theory of mind. So I understand that other people have their own plans, but that's incredibly difficult when you don't have good theory of mind. This can be to such an extent. I can remember working with a fabulous family some years ago where the young lad's theory of mind was so poor that when mum dropped him at school, it was almost like she then didn't exist because he couldn't imagine, picture and visualize mum in another circumstance when she wasn't with him. That's to the extreme of things. But theory of mind can be really quite complicated, and it's about our ability to think how other people might think differently to us, and that's really, really tricky for our kids. It's really tricky for our kids to know that other people have got different thoughts to them. So I've often spoken to parents and said, do you ever feel like your child thinks that you should be able to read their mind? And the parents have gone, yes. And I was like, that's because of theory of minds, that they don't realize that the thoughts in your head are different to the thoughts in their head. So therefore, you should be able to plan, predict, and monitor everything that they're doing, because what's in their head should be in your head, and they don't understand that it isn't. They also don't understand that somebody else might have a different point of view to them. So they believe that their point of view and their perspective is right. So you've possibly got into lots of arguments over the years about them being on a one-track mind, that what they think is right and what other people's thoughts and feelings are irrelevant. And that is because that their theory of mind is not working properly. There are things that we can do to help, and we'll go on to that in a moment. They also have real difficulty understanding other people's beliefs. So say, for instance, I'm of that generation where we were brought up that when you entered a house, you removed a hat. So say, for instance, a woolly hat or a baseball cap or something like that. The teenagers of today believe that it's okay to wear a baseball cap inside. So that's where a belief might differ, because I'm of a different generation and my mother is of a different generation again. And it's being able to understand that other people are coming towards the same circumstance but with different opinions. So that's incredibly difficult for them to take on board as well. They also struggle to understand that somebody might have a different attitude to them. So the example I used here is that I think that Colin Firth is really handsome, and therefore I watch all of the films he's in, even if it's a really bad film. I believe that he was far more handsome 20 years ago, but I still love him. So even though he's getting older, I still absolutely adore him. You might be sat there thinking, oh, Colin Firth, no, God, no, he's awful. Yeah, but that's okay, because we can have different attitudes and it's not a problem. It's also really incredibly difficult for your child to understand that somebody's emotion might be different to their emotion. So the example I've used in here is that the sound of rain on a roof makes me really happy. I think it comes from my childhood, where the only holidays we ever went on were camping. And of course, a lot of the time it rains. We were in the UK. But it's still that noise brings the emotion of happiness to me. And I think it brings the emotion of happiness because it was a holiday and holidays were happy. So therefore, my emotion might be different to somebody else's. Somebody else might be hearing that sound of rain and thinking, oh God, no, that's awful. Whereas I find it incredibly relaxing if I'm inside and I don't have to go out. So emotions are really incredibly difficult for your children to read and to understand that you might have a different thought, feeling, perspective, belief, attitude to what they have. In order to give you a little bit more of a context on this, I've added in a couple of YouTube films that you might find really beneficial. I particularly love the one by a Facebook blogger, vlogger, whatever you call them, called Agony Auty, who is a young woman with autism who talks about her life and talks about her struggles with things. And her video around these issues is absolutely superb, and I highly recommend that you watch it. That's the second link in this film. Okay, so how can we help children to improve their theory of mind? And I would say for a young child, what we do is play, 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 and play some more. In playing imagination games is incredibly important for children with neurodevelopmental differences. It can really help them to learn and to understand other people's perspectives and the thought that other people have different emotions. So playing is incredibly important, and supported play is incredibly important because they might not be able to do it on their own. So bearing in mind we're currently in a lockdown situation and my twins are now 14, it was a bit of a struggle to try and find some toys to demonstrate this. But I've got a couple of volunteers from my 14-year-old daughter's Jellycats collection. So it's thinking about that we might have little conversations between two animals, or we might converse with the animal ourselves. So we might say, oh, it's lovely to see you today, Mrs. Rabbit. And Mrs. Rabbit might say, oh, well, it's lovely to see you too. And she then might say, oh, and I've brought my friend, Mrs. Rabbit, the furry-eared one, with me today. And then they might talk about we are happy about something, or we are sad about something, or we are going to a tea party, or all sorts of different things. I used to spend hours, hours and hours and hours when my children were little, playing with Playmobil. I completely recommend Playmobil to every family, or Lego, where you can move a character around and you can create situations and you can have conversations between characters. Really, it's vitally important that that type of play happens with kids with neurodevelopmental differences, because what happens generally for a child who is neurotypical, they don't have a sort of difficulty, is they pick up these skills really quickly, really naturally, without much effort. But for children with neurodevelopmental differences, we need to put a lot of effort in to be able to help them to do these things. And it really does make a significant difference to, if it's a teddy bear's tea party, or it's my son had hundreds of knights and dragons and castles and things like that, and we were able to talk about and reenact and think about different things that might happen within those circumstances. Reading storybooks is incredibly important. Even if your child looks like they're not engaged with it, I would say still do it, because you're giving lots of different perspectives and opinions and thoughts and feelings within a story, particularly a really good story. You can even get things like this. So this is a series of books by a lady called Tracy Moroney that talks about different feelings and emotions that children might have, and it's a really good way of describing those thoughts and feelings to people. The other thing that we used a lot when the children were little, let me just try and get it in shot for you. It's a bit difficult. So this is a pop-up book with different rooms in it. Sorry, I'm making an absolute hash of showing you that, but it has little characters and little rooms, and they can go from place to place. So this is the bedroom that they're in, and there's a kitchen, and you can reenact stories within them. Those were incredibly useful. I've kept those for my grandchildren just in case I ever have any, because they're absolutely beautiful books. We can teach different emotions by using card games. There are loads of apps on phones and tablets nowadays where you can do different emotions games, and it'll explain an emotion to you. So it could be a snap type game, or it could be a matching pictures type game. They can be really useful. But also we can use a lot of social stories. You know, we have training on social stories available at the Pines, and they can be invaluable for some children in backing up that bit of social information that they've completely missed and they've not picked it up naturally. We can underpin it and support that by writing a social story about what they need to do and how they need to do it. I'll just leave the blue one at the moment and I'll come back to it. We can think about taking turns to talk about things that you like, such as I often get kids to play games where we think of a subject and then we think about our favourite things within that subject. So it might be our favourite chocolate bar, or our favourite pizza topping, or our favourite book or game to play, or whatever, that helps them to understand that not everybody has the same thought, feeling, belief as them. That can be really useful. And then back to the blue one, this is talking about things from different perspectives. So I'm just going to nip onto the next slide to tell you a little bit more about that. So this is getting people to think about the different perspectives of things. So it's choosing maybe one thing that that child's particularly passionate about and choosing another thing that they don't particularly like. Generally, I would choose somebody within a group to argue this point with me, but I'm just going to have to argue with myself for this example. So what I might say is, I think cats are absolutely incredible. They are friendly, they are furry, they love cuddles, they like attention, they talk to me. I've got 3 cats, and they talk to me, and it's just lovely. It's an interaction with somebody who's not expecting anything from me. So then another person would give the opposite opinion. So it might be, oh no, I don't like cats at all. I think they're really moody. I think they're really insular, and I just don't like them. I much prefer rabbits. Rabbits are just incredible. When you look at those furry ears, it's just so exciting, and they boing about, and it's just really cute. They're much better than a cat. So it's thinking about getting kids to think about other people's opinions just by playing games. So you could pick 2 things. It could be, I think pineapple belongs on pizza, or I think pineapple should only ever be eaten as a fruit, or those sorts of things. It's just a fun way of playing a game where you're looking at different people's opinions. If you've got a large family, it could be a dinner time activity where you go round and say, what's everybody's favourite flavour of ice cream, or what is everybody's favourite TV programme to watch? And it's just helping and supporting children to understand that not everybody has the same opinion as them, which is really important for them to learn from quite a young age. Okay, so moving on from theory of mind to central coherence. This one doesn't get spoken about as much, but it's important that you have an understanding of what it means. So central coherence is thinking about when I'm in an environment or a situation that I can get the overall impression or gist of the story of what's happening around me. And this can be incredibly difficult for kids with neurodevelopmental problems. So the example I've used is that a couple of years ago we went on holiday to Italy. It was an absolutely fantastic holiday. The weather was just amazing. The place where we were staying was beautiful. The pool was incredible. I wish I was there now. And they had the most amazing ice cream parlour just by the pool. So it was really, really good. We had a fantastic time. So I can put myself back there and I can imagine, I can picture, I can visualize, I can feel what was happening, how it was happening, how I was feeling. I can feel the warmth of the sun. And I can hear the children laughing, and I can see that as a big picture. That can be really quite difficult for kids with neurodevelopmental problems, either in thinking back to something such as that, or being in a situation at the moment where they're able to see everything that's going on around them. So oftentimes when we're in a lively situation, it's quite difficult for a child with a neurodevelopmental processing problem to be able to focus on all of it and see the big picture. They might be really focused on just one small part of what's happening around them. So they might be particularly focused on the ice cream and not be able to focus on everything else around them. So imagine you're in that situation with your child, you go and buy an ice cream, you've got to get back to the sunbeds where they were. So for somebody who is neurotypical, they'd be able to do that. They'd be able to picture where they were, they'd be able to figure out the route back to where they came from, and they'd be able to get back to that safe place. For a child with a neurodevelopmental difference, that's trickier, because once you're focused on one thing, say the ice cream in your hand, everything else goes out of the window and out of the picture. So that often means that because they're not getting that bigger picture, they're not always able to keep themselves safe, be able to cross a road appropriately, not trip over a sunbed, not walk into somebody, because they might be fixed and rigid on the one thing and not be able to see the bigger thing, which can be really quite tricky for managing different situations and circumstances. So for as an example, we've all been in that sort of soft play environment, whereas a neurotypical child might run off and play, might be able to experience the slides, the climbing frame, or the other children, being able to manage a line, being able to manage a queue. Whereas for a child with a neurodevelopmental difference, even the volume might be utterly overwhelming, so then they can't manage the rest of it. Or they may be completely focused on one piece of the play equipment, so then can't get in a queue, can't see that other people might want to be involved in that piece of play equipment as well. So that can be quite difficult to then manage their behaviour within that circumstance. And that is because of the central coherence. They're focused on one part of it and not the overall picture. So how can we strengthen kids' central coherence? So obviously every child's different. So one child might have major issues with this, another child might not. So it's thinking about what sorts of circumstances you've seen that your child struggles with and what we might need to do about it. So we might need to provide additional time to process the information, because even the most highly intelligent child with a neurodevelopmental processing problem might need extra information about that circumstance in order to be able to manage. So for instance, I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago with a teacher talking about a young man taking Nat 5 English. This will be next year when exams are back on. So we were thinking about what he might need, and we were thinking about things like he might need a crib sheet, because he might not be able to hold all of the information, all of the detail in his head in order to be able to do it. So we were thinking about, the crib sheet might say, do 200 words of an introduction, then you need to argue the point, then you need to describe things, and then you need to conclude. I can remember talking to a young lad many years ago who said to me, he'd been in a history exam, and he said to me, one of the questions, Rachel, asked me to put myself in the position of a soldier in the First World War trenches, waiting for a battle about to start, and explain how I might be feeling. He said, well, I've never been in a trench, Rachel, so how on earth would I be able to say how that person might be feeling? And that's really difficult for some kids because they're not able to put themselves into that situation, into that, if you'd asked him about the dates of all of the different battles of the First World War, it'd have been bang on. That it'd have given you, exact details of the times and the places and the, even the geographical coordinates and the weapons that they would have used in that circumstance. But what he couldn't do was put himself into somebody else's shoes. Part theory of mind, part central coherence. He couldn't imagine himself in that circumstance. So it's thinking about how we word things for children with neurodevelopmental, excuse me, I'm tripping over my words here, for children with neurodevelopmental difficulties. So sometimes we might need to talk through things and be able to explain things and to look at all of the different aspects of things prior to going into a situation. So I'm sure you've all been into a birthday party with your child where your child has absolutely not been able to cope. So the next time we're going to a birthday party, let's do a bit of forward planning. Let's think about what that might look like, what that might sound like, what that might smell like. Yeah, the fact that it might be really noisy because all of the other children will be screaming, that it might be that there might be a bouncy castle at that party, or there might be a clown, or there might be a birthday cake, and getting as much information as we can from the parents who's running that party to be able to prep that child in what might happen in that circumstance, and actually being able to say to them, do you know what, it's absolutely fine if for the first half an hour you want to sit and just look at what everything else is going on around you and just take that time to process, then that's fine. For other circumstances, we might need to do plenty of planning. If, say, for instance, you've got a child who's starting a swimming club, for your neurotypical kid, they'd be able to go straight into the swimming club and be able to start. For a child with a neurodevelopmental difference, you might need to do some pre-prep. You might need to visit the swimming pool. You might need to visit the changing rooms. You might need a visual strip to help the child to know about getting their swimming costume on. You might need to have gone into that place quite a few times so they get used to the sensory stimulus of what's happening in that pool, because they're not going to be able to go straight into that circumstance. I can speak of this from experience. My own son's got some neurodevelopmental differences, and swimming lessons were hell on earth. He just really struggled to cope with them. So we had to break it down into really small chunks of what was manageable. And in the end, I just had to get him a one-to-one tutor because he couldn't cope with the group situation. But I was determined he was going to learn to swim, obviously from a safety perspective. And he's really pleased now that he can swim. Although it is, his coordination's terrible, and so's mine. So we both swim like we're doing doggy paddle, but we get where we need to be. So sometimes we might just need to change it up and do something a little bit different, because actually being able to manage all of that circumstance can be really quite tricky. Okay, so we're now going to move on from central coherence onto context blindness. So this is a little bit different. This is thinking about being able to read a situation, being able to read the context of what is happening in that situation. So say, for instance, you're walking into a room and you want to talk to Johnny, but Johnny is already talking to Freddie, you can read that context and you could know that you might need to wait, but you're going to walk up to those people so that they become aware that you have something to say as well. That's being able to read a context, being able to read a situation and know what you've got to do within that situation to get your needs met. It's also about being able to change your behaviour between different contexts and to know that you need to behave in a different way in a different context. So the way I behave, say for instance talking to you on this film today, is different to how I might behave on a Saturday night when I've had a glass of wine and I'm talking to my friends, and that might be different to how I behave when I'm in front of my teenagers and all of their mates. Yeah, so I know that my behaviour might need to change depending on the context. Okay, so if you look at the three pictures on this slide, it's thinking about how we might talk in different circumstances. So in the first picture, you've got children concentrating, writing within a classroom. So that's thinking about within a classroom, I would use an inside voice and I would be talking fairly normally, but I wouldn't be shouting. Whereas in the playground, in the second picture, it might be absolutely fine for me to be able to shout and laugh and giggle and run around because it's a different context. And then the third context is some children sat in a cinema waiting for a film to start. And that's thinking about in that context that I might be whispering because everybody around me is waiting for the film to start, or it might have already started. And it's thinking about what do I need to do within that circumstance. And I, as a neurotypical adult, know what I'm supposed to do in different circumstances. But for kids with neurodevelopmental differences, this can be incredibly hard. So your average, your neurotypical kids, I don't like the word normal, there is no such thing, but your average kids would figure that out. Yeah, so they go into school, they go through nursery into P1 and they figure out what's allowed in different places at different times in different circumstances, maybe even what's an allowed behaviour with one teacher that's not an allowed behaviour with another teacher, which teacher is the strictest, which teacher allows you to do that or not do that, and being able to read that context. That's really quite tricky for kids with neurodevelopmental differences. Some other problems that your child might have with context is being able to read the other person's thoughts or feelings behind the situation that you're in. So the examples I've used is things like sarcasm, tones of voice, can be really quite tricky for kids to read. So it might get them into trouble. So say, for instance, you've got a teenage girl in a swimming pool who a young lad is looking at, and the teenage girl might say, "Are you looking at me?" An autistic boy might reply yes, because they tend to be incredibly honest. But that actually might end up with that girl slapping that boy because she thinks that she's being judged, because he can't read the context of the sarcasm. I don't want you looking at me. This is private. You're making me feel uncomfortable. They're not always able to read that context. Or when we're saying things that are jokingly, having a bit of fun, having a bit of banter, can be difficult for some kids to read. So the example is that a parent jokingly tells a sibling to kick his brother's butt. That kid's not actually going to do that. You're just having a joke, you're just having a bit of fun. But the child with autism thinks that that's really going to happen, and then feels quite defensive and goes on the attack first. I've known that happen within school playgrounds where children have misread the context and the way that things have been said. The third example I've used is that somebody who's usually quite sarky with you, say for instance, a teenage sister, who actually says to you one day, "Whoa, I really like that t-shirt. You look really cute in that." But because you're used to your teenage sister always being quite derogatory or quite sneering, yeah, you might misread that situation and get it wrong. I talk to kids all of the time who've got social situations wrong because they just can't read the context, they can't read the emotion, they can't read between the lines, and that essential coherence of getting that gist, reading between the lines, figuring out what somebody means is so difficult for kids with neurodevelopmental problems, and they end up in all sorts of tricky circumstances where they've just got it completely wrong. Okay, so how can we help a child who's struggling with context blindness? We need to keep things really clear. Keep your language clear, keep it concrete. Don't sort of put the would you, could you, should you, can you, will you type questions to children with neurodevelopmental problems, because it just becomes incredibly confusing. Avoid slang, avoid sarcasm and idioms. Things like keep your eye on the ball, would you like to take a chair, the pot called the kettle black. All of those things are meaningless for a child that can't read between the lines and figure out what they mean. Recognise that the child might not understand the meaning of jokes that are being told. You might need to do some explanation so they're not reading it wrong. Work with them so that they learn to understand the different information that they're going to need in different situations. So think about planning and organising and, using social stories. How are you going to figure out this situation? What does your behaviour need to be in this situation? When a child's getting upset for no apparent reason, there will be a reason. To us who can read the context and can figure out what's going on, it might be difficult for us to see what that reason is, but there is a reason. Okay, so talk to them quietly, calmly, and try to figure out what it is that they've missed, what they've misread, what they've not understood in that situation. Explain those misunderstandings clearly and calmly. That might need to wait until they're calm later in the day. And practice social skills wherever you can in the real world, wherever that's possible, because the more you get out there, the more you try it, the more you get into situations that are tricky, the more you can scaffold that child so that they learn these new skills and the different things that they need to do. Because if you just avoid it all of the time, they're never going to learn what you can and can't do in certain situations. Okay, so the last topic we'll come into is executive functioning. This might be a term that you've heard. It tends to be a term that we're using a little bit more at the moment. And for kids with neurodevelopmental difficulties, executive functioning can be incredibly important because they misread a lot of situations, and it's difficult for them to, that central coherence, that theory of mind, read between the lines. What is somebody else thinking? If you think about this, brain patterns are so complicated. So for our children, this can just be an absolute minefield. So I'm going to break this down into some more categories for you. So working memory. So a working memory is your ability to hold on to some information in your mind and then use it. So you remember I was talking about the boy in the English exam earlier? Because his working memory is not that great, that's why we might need a crib sheet. So if you think of it, an example that you've been at home and you've wrote a shopping list out, and if you're anything like me, you've left it on the kitchen table and you've gone off to Tesco's without it. But walking around the supermarket, I can have a general idea of what's in what cupboard, what's in the fridge, what's in the freezer, what did I write on that list, because my working memory is able to picture that. The second bit of it is inhibitory control, and that's the ability to master thoughts or impulses so as to resist temptation, distraction, habits, and to pause and wait and think before acting. If your child's autistic, if your child's got ADHD, this is so difficult because they literally think, do. Yeah, so something happens and it's a quick response. They don't have that ability to stop. What will the consequences be? What will happen if? Okay, so it's really difficult for them to be able to think and plan and organize themselves really well. A good example is I was talking to a lad this morning who's just built himself an all singing, all dancing computer. So all he wants to do at the moment is be on this gaming computer. But that's at the deficit of his schoolwork. But because of his executive functioning, all he could say to me was, well, I've just spent £600 on this, Rachel. I've got to use that. And I was like, yeah, you've got to use that, but it's got to be balanced. And for him, that temptation, that impulse, yeah, to act on what he wants to do is much more motivating than having to do schoolwork. So for example, you know, I might have to do the ironing when what I really want to be doing is being, you know, Sunday afternoon is when I tend to do the ironing. And what I really want to be doing is laying on the settee watching Netflix. But I have to resist that impulse because school uniform ready for Monday has to be the priority. So because I'm neurotypical, because I'm an adult, I'm able to plan, prioritize, and organize myself in a way that I don't allow my impulses, my temptations, my distractions to take over. Cognitive flexibility is incredibly difficult. Again, I had this same conversation with this lad this morning when Dad was saying he can't stop he can't stop the gaming and come on to the homework, and I'm like, no, actually he can't, because that cognitive flexibility, being able to switch gears between something you really want to do and something you're really not that keen on, is quite difficult, and more so if you've got a neurodevelopmental. You know, I think we'd all struggle with that, but if you've got a neurodevelopmental difficulty, it's even more of a struggle with cognitive flexibility to switch gears, adjust to change. What are the demands? What are the priorities? What are the perspectives of other people? So say, for instance, if I was cooking dinner in the kitchen and I heard a scream from upstairs, I would be able to, so even though I can't see it, I can use my context, I can use my theory of minds, and I can use my central coherence to get the gist of what's happening. And know that if somebody's screaming, that means somebody's hurt. I might not know how, but I know that somebody's in pain. And I know that as the adult in the situation, I've got to do something about it. So I switch the oven off and I run, okay? I can do that because I've got that cognitive flexibility. Who's been in a situation where a child's been so engrossed in a computer game or a film or a book or whatever it might be that your child is passionate about, that literally there could be a volcano in the next room, and they're literally not even taking it on board because they are so focused on what's actually happening in the situation that they're in. Okay, so we're going to continue with the next examples using a cut finger that I've heard that scream and I've gone running. So following on, I need skills that guide the behaviour that I need to be doing. And these include things like response inhibition. This is about stopping ourselves so that we can think through what we should do next, or what we should say, how we should behave. And response inhibition is going to stop me from screaming when I see blood. There's a reason I didn't become a general nurse. I'm really not very good with blood. I'm either going to faint or pass out. But what I can do as an adult is ride above that, put in response inhibition, and not do something that would be impulsive. So who's knows a child who literally says what they see, and it might be, your hair looks dreadful, or what's that spot on the end of your nose, where the rest of us would be controlling that response, they're unable to control it. I had a fantastic example with a wee lad that I met a few years ago, and I had my ID badge on because I was in his primary school, and he had a look at the picture on my ID badge. It was the first time we'd ever met, and he said to me, "I'm not being funny, Rachel, but you look a lot better in that picture than you do in real life." And I said, well, yeah, you're quite right, actually, because that picture was taken 10 years ago. And he said, ah, that will explain it. For response inhibition, the rest of us would have thought, oh, I'll probably not say that she looks better in that picture because actually she might be a bit upset. But he doesn't have response inhibition, so he says what he sees. Emotional control can also be really difficult. So this is about managing your emotion so that you can finish the task. So if we think back to the cut plaster, even though I hate the sight of blood, I can pretend that I'm absolutely fine. I can stop it bleeding and I can put a plaster on. I can master my emotional control. I can hold it in. Again, it could be incredibly difficult for your child. Attention. So sometimes we need to pay quite close attention to a task that we need to do, even if we're bored, even if we're tired, even if we think, oh God, this is pointless. Yeah, we can keep our attention. Attention span, again, particularly for the kids with ADHD, can be incredibly difficult. My son's currently being tested for dyspraxia, and his executive functioning issues around this tend to be that his attention span is just all over the place, and it's incredibly difficult for him to focus. Task initiation is part of executive functioning, so that's ability to get on with something when you need to get on with it, starting a job when you need to do it. This was another problem that I was talking to with the dad and the son this morning. That task initiation was something that he was really struggling with. So that it's got to be done, it cannot wait. Flexibility, I'm pretty flexible. If I need to change plans, I can change plans, but realistically, if we think about all of us, we all sort of like things to happen in a certain way. So the morning routine in our house is quite set. There's quite a pattern to it. We do things at certain times, being at certain places for certain times. We all sort of like that structure, that routine. But if you are neurotypical, it is much easier to be flexible and to be able to change a plan when you need to. So when we talk about choice and change and transitions for kids with neurodevelopmental difficulties, the reason they have problems with this is because of executive functioning. And the final bit of that is persistence. It's being able to keep going, even when you're tired and you think, oh, I've had enough of this. I haven't got the energy. I'm supposed to be doing something else. So back to the cut finger. It might be, is the dinner burning? Did I remember to turn the hob off? What have I done? But we've got that ability to keep persisting and to keep on with it. And if you're having some struggles with your executive functioning, then that can be quite difficult for you. Okay, so let's think about this then. Does your child have problems with executive functioning? Are they easily distracted? Do they have trouble starting their homework? Or are they one of these kids that says, I don't do homework because I do schoolwork at school. I can't do it at home because it's schoolwork, so therefore it fits into one box. Do they have trouble keeping their bedroom tidy? Can they not organise what they need into their school bag? Do they have trouble getting to places on times? Do they have trouble transitioning from one task to another? This is my son in a nutshell. He just struggles with all of this, but over the years, by really simple methods, we've figured out what works and what helps him. I've already talked about a lot of the strategies that we've used over the years, and then we'll talk through some more in the next bit. Have a look at these examples. Is this your child? This is part of their condition. I talk to lots of parents who get incredibly frustrated. He can't do this, he can't do that. He should be able to do that at his age. Well, yeah, he should, but he can't. And that's part of his condition. And we had a situation at Christmas. My son got an electronic drum kit for Christmas. He's absolutely thrilled to bits with it, and quite honestly, it's the best money we've ever spent because he's never off it. Although it is driving me mad. Thankfully, we live in a detached house, so he wanted to set this drum kit up in the conservatory. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. We can move some furniture out and we can get that set up for you, mate. It's not a problem. So I got up one morning and I think this must have been Boxing Day or the day after. I think it was the day after. and he really wants to get the drum kit up. And my husband had said to him, well, you'll have to get in there sorted first, because this is the room that he hangs around in a lot. So there's lots of smelly socks and football boots and all sorts of stuff that he leaves laying around, because he's, you know, apart from having some neurodevelopmental issues, he's a teenager. So my husband had said, you need to get that room sorted out before we're able to do that. And I gets out of bed, because I love lying during the holidays, and my son is just sat there with this like blank expression on his face, and he just couldn't do it. He couldn't get himself going. He couldn't initiate the task. He couldn't he couldn't fathom how he would break that down into small chunks. He couldn't think about what was needed. He couldn't plan. He couldn't organise. Yeah, and this is, you know, this is quite typical of kids with these sorts of problems, and indeed, you know, as they go into adult life as well, we need to sort of try and help them to figure out some strategies now. So what I did was like, right, your first task is going to be A. Once you've done that, right, okay, now you can go on to B, which is pick all the football boots up. When he'd done that, I then gave him another task. Yeah, so it took us a while, and it took us, you know, it took us a few hours, but bit by bit during the day. I also gave him some breaks into it, because he can't sustain his attention for very long. So we built in breaks, we built in snacks, we built in, you know, very simple tasks, knowing exactly what he needed to do, when he needed to do it. I got in there with him and got involved, and we managed it, and we made a beautiful job out of it, and he managed to get his drum kit up, and he was absolutely thrilled to bits. And because he wants his drum kit in there, and then that's highly motivating for him, he's been able to, with sort of quite short, quite simple messages, say for instance on a daily basis, you need to do this. Yeah, so it might be that pots need to come out, rubbish needs to go into a bin, because he doesn't have that ability to always see all of the context of what's going on around him and to figure out what he needs to do. So he might just need little reminders, but it's little reminders, you know, it's not a stick to beat him with. It's bring your pots through, sweetheart. You know, you've already got a glass, you don't need another one. You know, it's just things that, you know, simple reminders to help him to function. And he does incredibly well. You know, his teachers for digital learning have broken down subjects into small chunks for him. They've done videos for him. He does online sessions with his support for learning teacher, where they talk him through what he needs to do, because he can't look at that digital classroom and figure out what on earth he's supposed to do. It's too much. Yeah, it just utterly overwhelms him, and he can't do it. So we've figured out a different way, and we've worked with other people around him in order that he can be able to function. Okay, so how can you support your child to improve their executive functioning? Because it is possible, and it is manageable, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming. So plan, and plan some more. Use a visual timetable if you need to. Use a blackboard, use a whiteboard, have things up where a child knows where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, how they're going to do it. Use things like a now and next board where you're planning the day down into small chunks. Can be really useful. Break things down into small tasks. You know, telling a child with these sorts of difficulties to tidy their bedroom, it's not going to happen. You need to give them some details. I was working with a young man a couple of weeks ago where we broke it down to, in what he needed to complete was to open his blinds and curtains, to make his bed, to pick the rubbish up off his floor and put it in the bin, to ensure that all his washing was in the basket, but it had been separated. So we broke that down into a chart for him to be able to manage, yeah, because his executive function is all over the place. Mum and Dad want him to be able to do it. He's 15, he should be able to do it. Well, yeah, he's 15. But his executive functioning, he finds this incredibly difficult. So that's what we've had to do. I've had one of my colleagues looking at his digital timetable with him. to look at what needs to be achieved by when, and when he needs to have things, and on what day he needs to do subjects. Because actually for him, looking at that Google Classroom, he just wasn't completing much at all, because he'd just not been able to do it. And when he told me that, I was then able to say to the CCW who works with him on a weekly basis, look, let's help him plan, monitor, break this down into small chunks for him, and help him to make that clearer in his head, which is what we've been able to do. Play board games, play card games. This might sound unusual, but what you need for good executive functioning is this front bit of your brain. It's called your prefrontal cortex, and that's your problem-solving centre. And particularly for teenagers, during puberty, you've got part of your back of your brain is called your amygdala, and your amygdala is your anger centre, your centre. That grows really, really quickly when puberty hits. And the prefrontal cortex, which goes, whoa, stop, wait, hold on, grows really, really slowly during puberty, which is a bit of a mismatch. But by doing things where you've got problem-solving activities, it enables this part of your brain to click in and to work really well. So things like Snap, Double, Face 10, Uno, games where you've got to go quite quickly, even things like Cluedo, where you're having to solve a mystery and you're having to figure out the whys and wherefores, the Monopoly, where you're trying to gather all your things in. These sorts of things are really good fun, but they're also really good for your prefrontal cortex. So I definitely recommend playing those. Also things like, apps on phones, the likes of Candy Crush or those types of games where you're having to do something quite quickly and you're having to get your brain to follow a picture around quite quickly. Again, brilliant for your prefrontal cortex. And it doesn't feel like a chore, because what these kids don't want is more things that feel like a chore. Listen to music, dance, learn to play an instrument. My son, we're now in March, he got this drum kit for Christmas, and it's just made such a difference to his ability to function. It's been mind-blowing for me, really, and I've worked in this field for donkey's years. And it's just been such a difference in his mood, in his outlook in life, because he's having to do something quite quickly, and he listens to rock music through his headphones, and he's doing the coordinated movements on the drum kit, and it really has made a significant difference to him. Play a sport, things like badminton, tennis, football, rugby, whatever it might be, where your brain's having to think quickly and it's having to adapt, can be really, really good. Use lists to keep track of yourself. I wouldn't be able to function unless I had a list, because it helps you to know what you've got to do, but it also helps you to see that you've achieved something as well. And we all need to feel like we've achieved something. And a lot of the time for kids, they're not seeing that achievement, so then their self-esteem can get quite low, and then that creates another difficulty. So being able to say, this is what you've achieved today, you've done brilliantly. For the lad where I did the tick chart for what he needed to do for his bedroom every day, he can now see that he's achieving, and he's getting something right. And his parents are able to put in some positive reinforcements. So rather than saying, get your bedroom tidied, get your washing in the basket, they're able to say, check the things off on your chart. And then when they go and check off with him, he's maybe done 4 out of the 5, and they'll say, oh, you've missed so-and-so. Remember to do so-and-so, and he picks it up. And then they're able to give lots and lots of positive reinforcement. But what they've also given him is what I refer to as scaffolding. So if I say to I've got twins who are 14. So if I say to my 14-year-old daughter that she's got to learn a new skill, I know, if you think about it as a brick building, I know that when I've added that extra brick into Imogen's tower, that it will stick because she's neurotypical. Okay? So I know that, say for instance, I've maybe taught her something twice, yeah, and it'll stick, it'll stay there, and she'll be okay with it, she'll manage it, okay. I know that if I'm teaching my son the same task, that I might have to scaffold that a bit more firmly, and it might take longer and it might take more repetition. And he will be able to get it, but it's going to take longer and it's going to take more effort from me, and it's going to take some scaffolding. So if you imagine like a building that's crumbling, and you've built this scaffolding around it, and it's thinking about, how do I hold that in for that child? Yeah, so for children with neurodevelopmental difficulties, scaffold, 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 and scaffold some more. Do loads of imaginary play if you've got small kids, because it really helps your brain to become flexible. Video games, I know this is always a contentious one because kids nowadays tend to play them too much. That's why I've put in moderation. I was talking to the lad I was talking to this morning with a £600 gaming system, and I was saying to him, do you know that actually in terms of your brain development, playing video games should be no more than 2 to 3 hours a day? And he was horrified because he's doing a lot more than that. Okay, video games are great, you know, on their own. There are loads of skills you can learn through video games. There's some very, you know, I'm not sort of into the shooting, killing, blowing up type ones, but there are some really good ones out there, particularly if you're thinking sort of that mid range for kids, sort of like maybe between 8 and 12. Minecraft is absolutely incredible. I was blown away when my kids got into Minecraft. It is so good because you're developing and you're building and you're adding to. Great for your executive functioning. So it really helps you to improve your response time, it's selective attention, and you're having to control some of your inhibitions at times. So there is some positives in it, but obviously you want to be careful how much they're playing. Yeah, so for a child sort of between 12 and 14, no more than 3 hours a day. And yeah, I know a lot of them play a hell of a lot more. So this visual at the moment is just a quick example of a visual timetable that you might use with a child. For some kids you could do this in writing, for some kids you do it in pictures. I worked with a young man some years ago where we had a big whiteboard up in his kitchen. So he knew what was planned on each given day, and he knew where appointments were and things like that. And it really helped him to feel safe, because a lot of the time people talk about kids with neurodevelopmental difficulties being controlling. Well, you would only have controlling behaviour if you feel unsafe. You're seeking to feel safe if you're trying to control a situation. So it's thinking about, how do I enable this child to feel safe, to feel secure, to know that I've got their backs, to know that they're okay with me, that I've got a plan, that I've got a system, that I know what's coming next. It's really, really important for kids. Okay, so again, just another quick visual in a different way that's showing a child what they need to do with regard to tidying a bedroom. So this is, you know, put your toys in the toy box, put your washing in the basket, make your beds, and on the drawers in the bottom right hand corner, sometimes we might put the picture of the actual item of clothing that goes in that drawer. That can be really quite good for kids who don't have that ability to visualize. So if I looked at my drawers closed, I would be able to tell you what's in each drawer, because I've got that ability to visualize what's in there. I've got that theory of mind and that central coherence and that ability to get the gist of the situation. And I know that in the top drawer it's pants, in the second drawer it's socks, in the next drawer down it's leggings, in the next drawer down it's pajamas. I know what's in there. But for a child who doesn't have that ability to picture and visualize, sticking picture on things can be really quite useful. For kids, you could do the same thing for setting the table, or I'm currently teaching my son how to sort his own washing into different piles, and how to ensure, he's massively into band t-shirts, so making sure that the band t-shirts are turned inside out so they don't fade. And then I'm also teaching him how to put things on the area and what goes where. I could do that visually if I needed to. You know, I could put a chart out. You could do a visual thing for getting ready in the morning, the sequence of getting dressed, what you need to do with regards to breakfast and lunch, and yeah, you could do visuals for anything you're trying to teach, really. Okay, so just another example of a visual of how we might break something down. We have to break things down. So say, for instance, you wanted to learn how to play netball. I used to play netball at school. I was useless at it, but I used to play netball. And it's thinking about the different skills that you need in order to be able to play the game. For a child with a neurodevelopmental problem, they might need to learn the skills separately. So they might need to learn the bouncing, they might need to learn the catching and learn the shooting, all as separate skills, and then put those skills together. Because learning the whole skill at once could potentially be too much for your child to be able to manage. So that was just an example of how you might break things down a little bit. Finally, just a reminder about imaginary play. I can't emphasize enough how important imaginary play is. Some years ago, I worked with a little boy who was 4, and when I met this little boy, his parents were really thrilled because he knew all his numbers and he knew how to count and he could recognize them and he could switch computer on and he could manipulate things within the computer, but he didn't have any of the social skills. He didn't have any of the executive functioning skills that you would expect of a 4-year-old. So I introduced lots of different types of play into that house of how we would start, stop, predict, imagine, give characters to things, have a tea party, play with knights and castles, dress up, be different personalities. And that really helped him to be able to manage himself much better when he was then starting. Well, he'd already started a private nursery, but he was starting a mainstream school nursery, and he just got these chunks of learning that were missing. So you really can't overemphasize the fact of how play is so important, and play at an appropriate level is important as well, because I've also worked with parents who've got toys that are age appropriate for their child, but they might have missed the previous skill. So you can't learn how to do a jigsaw puzzle until you've learnt how to do an inset puzzle. The animals that you might, on the pegboard type puzzle. You need to learn that first before you can then manipulate a jigsaw puzzle. You need to be able to work with Duplo bricks before you can work with Lego bricks. There are stages in play development that have to come first. It has to come in an order, so that you're building on a skill, because if some of the skills are missing, you've missed part of that executive functioning, theory of mind ability that your child might have. And sometimes we might need to go back a little bit and repeat some of these things. So one of my mums that I currently work with, and I've been involved in her family for years. We developed a brilliant system some years ago where we sort of set things together. So we had, knights and castles in a box, but then we also had books about knights and castles, and then we also had DVDs about knights and castles, or things that were saved on the the iPlayer type thing on knights and castles, so that we were able to take themes. Because what was happening with her children, she has 2 boys, and what was happening with the 2 boys is that there were so many toys in that house that they couldn't focus and they couldn't play because they couldn't choose what to play with. So by putting things into boxes, by theming things, by taking things out at different times, we were able to teach a lot of play skills, and that's done our boys a lot of good over the years, and it has instilled some of this executive functioning skill, which is really important. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm hoping that you got some benefit out of it. You might need to watch it a couple of times, get a pen and a paper, think about, okay, What is it that my child's struggling with it? Where do I think we've missed things? What sort of situations do they need some more support with? Break it down, plan it, underpin it, and scaffold it. What the aim now to do is to run some Q&A sessions about this subject. So if you've been watching this on our YouTube site or through the Pines website, if you also go into the training and development bit on the Pines website, there'll be links to tell you what training is available, either digitally or hopefully once we get back into a pattern of being in the Pines, we will hopefully be in person and I'll have you all doing teddy bears picnics. Thanks ever so much. I'll talk to you all again soon. Bye.